Hello and welcome to a brand new chapter in the Complete Web Developer series. In this series, my goal is to take you from an absolute beginner to a job-ready developer. Now in this chapter, what we're going to do is we are going to build an API using Node.js. Now, what is an API and what is Node.js? Well, first and foremost, an API stands for Application Programming Interface. And what that really means is it is a way for an application to make calls or retrieve information from another application. For example, have you ever wondered how you can add an event in Facebook and it shows up on your Google Calendar? Well, it probably uses some sort of API call or API to interface from Facebook to Google so that it can add that calendar event. Okay, so this is a way for two different applications to talk to one another. It's very common, and in fact, in the very last chapter of the last video of the last chapter, rather, we interfaced with an API to get information about the Star Wars. Now, that was a silly example, but someone had set up an API that it was a public API, so that wasn't restricted or anything, but we can make a request from that API and get information about Star Wars. Now, what we want to be able to do, though, is create our own API so that people can make requests to our API and can add things or retrieve information. And the reason that we are going to do this is not only, well, up until this point, we've been building web applications. And the web applications up to this point would have all... Excuse me, they were self-contained. So you had your database and your server and then your front end all packaged together and working together. Well, a newer way of developing is to develop your backend as an API. And then the reason that that's powerful instead of packaging it up as a web app is because now I can build multiple applications that interface with the same API, and I don't have to rebuild any of the backend. I can share the data. So for example, if I wanted to build a web application, I can use a standalone front-end web application that sends information and gets information from the API. And then also I could build a mobile application that would interface with that same API. And so now my data is synced and I don't have to worry about making API calls between the two. Rather, I have different front-end applications and they all connect to the same back-end through an API or an interface, right? A programming interface. So that's the purpose of doing this. Now, what's really cool about building your backend in this way is as your applications grow, if you want to allow people to interface in a traditional sense with your backend or with your application, they can get access to your API as well. In this case, we're only going to be using our front end. In this chapter specifically, we're going to be interfacing with our API strictly through Postman, which I'll go into, but it's just a tool that we can test our API with. And then in the next chapter, we're going to write a front end that's completely separate code base using React.js. And React.js will interface with this same API. So this API is going to be kind of a simple example of doing some CRUD operations. So we'll have some login and registration stuff with our API so that you can log in. So it'll have some security, but it will also do CRUD operations for adding users, adding contacts, and adding to-dos, and also updating, deleting, and reading those things is what this API is going to do. And then in the next chapter, we're going to use React.js to build a front end that will interface with that, and then we'll have a full application. Okay, so that's what an API is. What is Node.js? Well, up until this point, we've been using PHP as our backend language. Now, admittedly, PHP is what I feel at most home with. If I were going to build an API today, and all the APIs I've built up until this point have been built with PHP. But Node.js is a backend implementation of JavaScript. So what they did was they took the JavaScript engine out of a browser basically and took that engine and used it on a backend server. So now we can write our backend using JavaScript. Now, the reason that this is pretty powerful, especially for an API, is because remember when we talked in the last chapter about JavaScript being an asynchronous language. And because JavaScript is an asynchronous language, it can handle many requests. Let me explain what the difference would be between a PHP API and a JavaScript or a Node.js API. So a PHP API, the downside of this is a request comes in, and now the processor is just sitting and waiting for this process to do its work. So if it's going to make a database call or anything else, it has to finish that, and then it responds with something, and then it can take another request and handle that request, and so on and so forth. Whereas JavaScript is asynchronous. So what it can do is it can process a request, and while that request is doing something, it can go off and start something else, and it can handle many more connections in the same amount of time. And so Node.js is in JavaScript specifically is a uniquely perfect scenario to build an API with for that purpose. Is you can use less server space and yet less server resources to handle the same amount of connections as you would have to with PHP. And that might matter if your API is going to be taking in a lot of requests potentially. So if you have a lot of different applications interfacing with your API, that could be a lot of requests to handle. And so Node.js can handle that better. Now, PHP does do better at some things than Node.js, so there's still indications and times that you would use PHP over Node.js. But I've been excited to learn Node.js myself. Now, at my job, our API is written in PHP. It's quite a bit older. The company is older, and in fact, when I first started working in the company, Node.js wasn't really a thing. And so I'm kind of an older developer, and I've never actually built anything with Node.js other than example applications in preparation for this series. Now, why would I tell you that? Well, one, I want to tell you that just in full transparency. But two, I kind of wanted to encourage you that, look, just because you've done something a certain way forever doesn't mean you can't change or learn something new. I'm 40 years old, I'm a developer, and now I'm learning something new, and I did it just to teach you guys, basically. But with that being said, how did I learn it? Well, I looked at some documentation, but primarily, let me share my screen here. I want to give a shout out to this guy. If you go on YouTube and look for Academind, I learned Node.js from him. He has a series on here that's very good. Now, I have adapted this series that you're going to learn through me to work with our project, and he also uses a database called MongoDB with his example, but we will be using MySql instead. And so this is quite a bit different when it gets into the database stuff and how that is handled. But if you haven't seen this guy, I would say he's more of a professional than I am in this regard with using Node.js, and he's pretty fun to watch as well, and I enjoy him. I'm a fan of his, and I subscribe to him on YouTube, so I wanted to do him a little justice and show you guys where I learned Node.js for this series. But this is going to be a little bit more of a detailed example of building an API than what he does. So we're going to do a little bit more than in that series, and we're going to interface with MySql instead of MongoDB. So if you don't know what MongoDB is, and you will know what MySql is because we've been using MySql this entire series. But MongoDB is a completely different paradigm and a different way of databases working. So for example, we use what is called a relational database. MySQL is a relational database that is structured much like tables, and you relate data using foreign keys. Well, MongoDB is a complete different paradigm than that, and MongoDB is a document type database to where you store documents. So you have basically a big JSON object that's stored as a document, and you can relate data. However, that's not the strength of Mongo. It doesn't actually do a very good job at relational databases. So if you're building something that needs a relational database, you want to use MySql or another relational database like Postgres. But Mongo has its purpose and it has its benefit. Now, for a while, everybody was saying everybody's going to use Mongo and nobody's going to use relational databases anymore. But that's just misguided. MySql is still much a relevant, and relational databases are very relevant. And a lot of people are switching back to those after dealing with some issues with Mongo. And so because I am most familiar with MySql, and I think it's actually a better database for what we're building, we are going to stick with a relational database, and so we're going to use MySql. But if you do want to see an example of using MongoDB, I do suggest checking out Academind, his course there, and it is a good thing to learn MongoDB, but I do think in this scenario and situation, the best application for us is going to be MySql. All right, with that being said, let's go ahead and do some of the setup that we're going to need to get started on this. And let me just I didn't even show you what we're building, so let me jump in and show you that real quick. I'm going to open up Postman here, and what we're going to be doing is we're going to be using Postman, which we'll install in a later video, but we're going to use Postman to go ahead and interface with our API. So what does that mean? Well, right now my API is running on localhost port 5000. Okay, that is my Node.js server, and it's running on my local machine. This would be on a live server, obviously, if you were going to do a live API. But I can interface through it with using URLs, and I can make post request here. So if I look at the body here, I sent my body as a JSON object with email and password, and then it returned to me an object that had a success boolean in it, and also, since it was a true, it's returned a JWT token. And we'll talk more about JWT tokens as we go, but this is my token here, and then I can use that token in the authorization header here with other parts of my API to do things like retrieve or make a GET request to my to-dos, and this will return a success message, and then it returns a JSON object with all of my to-dos in it. Okay, same thing with contacts. We're also going to be doing Crud Operations, so we'll be doing create, update, and delete endpoints to where we can add to-dos and contacts and users through our API, and it will return a very similar JSON structure there. Now what happens is your front end or the other application will get this JSON object, and it will interface back and forth with your API using this information. And so for our example, if I were going to print my contacts to the screen, my front end would make an API call to the back end and say, get me all the contacts for this user. And then the contacts would be returned, and the front end would loop through this JSON object and print these all out to the screen. Okay, so that's how that works. So that is what we're going to be building in this application. This is just a few examples of some of the requests that we're going to make. We're going to make some post and get and delete and patch requests, and so we're going to be using Postman to develop our API and to debug it. Okay, and so let's go ahead and talk about some of the software that we need to install in order to have this up and running. So if you go to nodejs.org and go to downloads, what you're going to want to do is you're going to want to download, and in our case I'm using the long-term stable release. You could use the current, but this is the version as of right now that this software is going to be using. So I do suggest that we all use the same versions because things will change, and as things change, it could break, or your code might have to be different than mine, and then you wouldn't be able to follow along with the videos. So in this case, let's go ahead and all use the same stuff. So let's use a long-term stable release here. So you'll download and install that. What you could do to check it is you could actually do node in a terminal, do node -- version, and you can see that I have version 14.18.0, which is the LTS version installed. The other thing you're going to need is npm. Now npm is a package manager, and currently I have 8.0.0 installed. npm is a package manager that is, if you install this using the Node.js installer, it will install Node.js and it will install the package manager for you. And this package manager is what was originally created for Node.js. And so we can get libraries and things installed that we're going to be using through NPM. And that will also help us to, all use the same versions of software. And so if you're thinking of PHP, and if you've used it before, NPM is much like Composer, probably a little more complex, but it's pretty much a package manager like Composer, or maybe Gems on Ruby on Rails or something like that. It is a package manager that we're going to use for Node.js. We'll also be using NPM in our next chapter when we're working with React.js, and then if we do the bonus chapter on Angular, we will also use NPM at that point to build our Angular application. And so what's really cool is building this Node.js API is whether we build our front end with React or we build it with Angular or we build it with PHP or whatever, we can use that back end Node.js server for all of those different front ends. Okay, so once you have that installed, let me check my thing and make sure. Okay, once you have that installed, what we're going to do is go ahead and create our repository. So off screen here, I'm going to go ahead and pull up my GitHub account, and I'm going to create my repository. And you guys can probably hear my dog snoring in the background. I let him out in the office with me because he was lonely inside by himself. He's getting old. So I'm going to create a new repo here. And we're going to call this Nodejs API. It's going to be public. I'm going to add a get ignore here. And we'll use Node for that. And for the description, I'm going to just put YouTube course for Nodejs API. I'm going to create that repo. And I know you guys can't see this. I just didn't want to show my GitHub stuff on here. But what I'm going to do now is, let me go ahead and drag this onto the screen here. Once you have this created, just go to code here and we're going to clone this. So I'm going to go ahead and click on SSH because if you've been following along, you will have SSH connected to your GitHub account. So I'm going to copy that. And then what we'll do is let's go into, so I'll clear this out. I'm in my home directory. And on Linux, or wherever you're at, you're gonna go to your htdocs folder where we've been storing everything else in. We're gonna stay there. And we'll go ahead and go to CD. In my case, it's opt-lamp htdocs. And then inside of here, we're gonna create a new repo here. So what I'm gonna do is say git clone, and then I'm going to paste my API, my GitHub URL here, and then I'm gonna do a space, and I'm going to clone it into a folder we'll just call API. Hit enter. Now it clones that into this folder called API. So if I cd into API now, you can see that we have a branch here set up, and if I do an ls ls-la, you can see that it has a git folder and a get ignore folder. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to go ahead and do code dot, and that will open up VS Code for me into that directory. And I'm going to move this to another workspace here. And inside here, if you open up the get ignore, since we used the node, template inside of our repo for GitHub, it's added some of the files here, and some of the most important ones that is added in here is the node modules. So make sure that you have all of this kind of stuff in your git ignore. If you did not use the template on GitHub to add the git ignore for Node, go ahead and add this stuff that you see here. This will keep us from pushing things we don't need to into our repository. You can right click to create a .git ignore if you don't have one. All right, once you've done that, what we're gonna do at that point is let's just go to your terminal, make sure you're in the root directory of your application here. And what we're going to do is we're going to install a library that makes working with Node.js really easy for our server. It's called Express. Express is a library much like, you can think of it as a lightweight version of Laravel, but in this case, Express is going to help us write a Node.js server application very, very quickly and easily, okay? It's actually not going to be that much code at all to build this thing. It's more explaining to you how it all works. So then what we're going to do here is we are just going to do npm, and then we're going to do install space -- save, and then what we're going to do is type in Express. Let me double check that before I hit enter. Yep, npm install -- save Express. I'm going to hit enter here, and you'll see that if we have everything installed correctly with Node and npm, it says that it added 50 packages. Wow. Okay, so let's go see what that did. Well, now you can see inside of our directory we have this node modules. Now this node modules is in the git ignore, so this is going to be kind of grayed out a little bit because it's not going to push all of these files, and thank God, because this is a huge amount of files. Okay, it would take forever, and we don't need to do that because any environment that we install this on, we can just run npm install, and it will take a look at this package.json. So if you look at here, we have a package lock.json and a package.json, and now it says that we have dependencies, and our dependency is going to be Express. Okay, and so this is going to install 4.17.1, and so if I run npm install, it will install this. In our case, we ran it already, and because we did the -- save, it added this to our dependencies. Okay, so we need that there, and this package.json file will grow as we build this API out. But if you have this up and running, then I think that is a great place for us to stop in this video. So let's just recap what we've gotten done. One, we've explained what an API is and what Node.js is. Now, you may not understand exactly what Node.js is, and just building an application in it will help us to define that more. But more importantly, we've installed our Node and npm. Okay, we've installed that software on our computers, and we've done that by going to Node.js and installing the long-term support version here, currently 14.18.0. And if it's in the future and you need that, you can go to downloads, and you should be able to find the older versions here. So you have the LTS and the current here. Okay, so we've installed that. The other thing is you could go to docs.npmjs.com and look at downloading and installing Node.js and npm. Here's some additional installation stuff here, but that is what we've done. Now we've also created a repository on GitHub, and this repository on GitHub will allow you to follow along. And right now, what I'm going to do is like I did in the other videos, each video will have its own branch. So this branch will be V1, and you can go ahead and pull my code if yours doesn't match to figure out what's going on with your stuff. Now, that's all we've done. So we've created a repo, and we've npm installed our first library called Express, which is a library that's going to help us build our Node.js server and serve it up in a very easy way that we can do our routing and our authentication and things like that very easy using Express. Now there are a lot of other ones we could have used, but in this case we are going to use Express. All right, so in the next in the next video, we're actually going to go ahead and get a server up and running and visit that server and make sure it's working. So I will see you in the next video. Please comment, like, subscribe if you are having fun, if you've liked this video, and I will see you guys in the next video. If you want to support me, you can support me on patreon.com/freeskills. See you soon.